It began like a whisper. A web drama, low budget, adapted from a fantasy novel with a devoted but niche following. Two relatively unknown actors. A sprawling world of magic, sex, and secrets, and a bond so magnetic it would transcend the screen, defy cultural boundaries, and ignite a fandom unlike anything Asia had seen in years. When The Untamed premiered in 2019, no one could have predicted the storm it would unleash. By the time the final episode aired, the show hadn't just created stars, it had created legends. Xiao Zhan and Wang were no longer just actors. They were icons. This is the story of how The Untamed changed everything. A modest beginning. Before the phenomenon, before the flashing cameras and roaring crowds, there was skepticism. The show was adapted from Mo Dao Zhu, the Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, a wildly popular Danmei novel, a genre that told emotional stories about the deep bond between two men. In a market still wary of such themes, many believed the adaptation would be watered down, stripped of its emotional core. The producers faced an impossible challenge. How do you tell a story of forbidden love and loyalty without ever saying it aloud? Enter Xiao Zhan, a former designer and boy band trainee who'd been quietly working his way through supporting roles. And Wang, a dancer and motorbike racer turned actor with a cool, almost untouchable aura. On paper, they couldn't have been more different. Xiao Zhan, warm, expressive, full of light. Wang, restrained, precise, unreadable. Together, they were about to create something unforgettable. First sparks on set. The filming of The Untamed wasn't glamorous. The budget was tight. The weather was merciless. Costumes were heavy, wigs itched, and the script demanded both grace and emotional control. But there was something electric brewing behind the camera. The first time Xiao Zhan, Wei Wuxian, and Wang Lan Wangji rehearsed a scene, the crew reportedly fell silent. It wasn't the lines, it was the energy, the unspoken understanding that passed between them. In one early scene, Wei Wuxian teases Lan Wangji with a smirk, mischievous, defiant, alive. Lan Wangji, stoic as ever, simply stares back. No words, just the faintest flicker of emotion. That moment, unscripted, raw, became the seed of their on-screen chemistry. Director Chenjalan later said, when the camera rolled on them, it felt like the world stopped breathing for a second. The magic of opposites. Wei Wuxian is chaos. Lan Wangji is order. One burns with life, the other walks in silence. Together, they orbit each other like twin stars, one pulling, one grounding. Their relationship unfolds across lifetimes, friendship, betrayal, loss, and redemption, painted with glances and gestures that spoke louder than any dialogue. And that's what drew the audience in. The subtext. Every look between them was a confession. Every note Lan Wangji played on his guqin was a memory. Every time Wei Wuxian laughed, it carried the echo of pain he never voiced. The drama didn't need to declare love. It showed it. In restraint, in silence, in loyalty that defied death itself. The scene that broke the internet. There's one moment fans around the world still whisper about. The scene by the cliff. Wei Wuxian, wounded and cornered, faces his former friends and disciples. His eyes, once so full of light, burn with despair. Lan Wangji arrives too late. The wind howls. The flute falls. And in that final, devastating moment, Wei Wuxian smiles, that heartbreaking, defiant smile, before he lets go and falls into the abyss. The screen fades to black. The world wept. Clips of the scene flooded social media. Fans dissected every frame, every tear, every note of music that underscored the silence. In that moment, The Untamed transformed from a cult fantasy to a cultural earthquake. From cult to global sensation. It started quietly, fan edits, fan art, translations. Then it spread. Soon, The Untamed wasn't just a Chinese drama. It was a worldwide movement. Netflix picked it up. Subtitles appeared in more than 20 languages. Concert halls filled with fans waving light sticks and screaming the names Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji as if they were real. The hashtag the Untamed trended in countries where Chinese dramas had never made an impact before: Mexico, Brazil, the Philippines, France, even the US. It wasn't just the story. It was the emotion, the connection. People saw themselves in these characters, misunderstood, lonely, yearning for acceptance. And suddenly, Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo weren't just actors. They were symbols of something greater, the power of quiet love, of authenticity, of finding someone who truly sees you. Behind the cameras, a brotherhood. Off-screen, their dynamic was just as captivating. Xiao Zhan's warmth balanced Wang Yibo's cool detachment. Interviews became fan events in themselves. Fans studied every glance, every shared joke. In one viral clip, Xiao Zhan jokingly scolds Wang Yibo for being too quiet. Yibo smirks and murmurs, "You talk too much." The internet exploded. Their friendship became part of the legend, an unspoken continuation of the bond their characters shared. And yet, fame came with a price: the weight of stardom. The success of the Untamed was blinding. Overnight, both actors went from relative obscurity to being two of the most recognizable faces in Asia. But fame burns. Fan wars erupted. Media chased rumors. Online scrutiny was relentless. Xiao Zhan, in particular, faced a wave of digital controversy that would have broken many. Yet through it all, his resilience only deepened the public's admiration. In a later interview, Xiao Zhan said quietly, "I learned that you can't control how others see you, only how you choose to stand." And stand he did. Wang Yibo, ever the calm anchor, continued his steady rise, balancing acting, music, and his passion for racing. The two remained respectful, supportive, and silent about the noise that surrounded them. Their silence spoke volumes. The music, the myth, the memory. The soundtrack of The Untamed deserves its own story. Each song, haunting, poetic, aching with emotion, became a vessel for what couldn't be said aloud. Unrestrained, sung by Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo themselves, captured the soul of the series. Two voices blending, one bright, one low, weaving through verses about freedom, destiny, and the courage to be oneself. It wasn't just a song, it was an anthem. Fans cried when they first heard it performed live. The melody carried the ghosts of the story: love hidden in plain sight, loyalty beyond life and death. Even now, years later, the opening notes of Unrestrained can bring entire audiences to tears. Cultural shift. What The Untamed really did. The Untamed didn't just break records, it broke barriers. It challenged what mainstream storytelling could look like in Chinese media. It proved that audiences were ready for complex relationships that defied traditional labels. It bridged East and West, introducing millions to the world of xianxia, a genre rich with mythology, martial arts, and spiritual philosophy. And it opened doors for future adaptations to be braver, bolder, and more emotionally honest. But perhaps its greatest legacy was this: it made people feel seen. In every country, fans wrote letters saying, "I've never felt represented like." Before The Untamed became a global obsession, it was just another name on a long list of web dramas waiting to be noticed. No glittering budgets, no famous leads, just a dream and a storm quietly forming behind the camera. The production started in near silence. It was 2018. Fantasy dramas were everywhere, but none dared to adapt Mo Dao Zhu Shi, a novel that carried both magic and controversy. The novel's themes were delicate, its emotional depth hard to capture on screen. Yet one small production team believed they could bring its world, full of sword fights, spirits, and unspoken love, to life. When casting began, no one expected two young men, almost strangers, to become the beating heart of it all. The casting gamble. Xiao Zhan wasn't the obvious choice. At that time, he was a newcomer, polite, earnest, with that unmistakable glimmer in his eyes. He had only a few acting credits and came from a design background, not the usual celebrity training track. When he auditioned for the role of Wei Wuxian, the room was quiet. Then he smiled, that radiant, mischievous smile that could melt tension and chaos alike, and the director knew. He didn't just act, he breathed the character. Wang Yibo's journey to the role of Lan Wangji was different. Reserved, serious, with a precision that came from years of dancing, he carried a quiet power. When he walked into the audition, the team noticed his posture first, straight, calm, almost regal. He barely spoke, but his presence filled the room. They were opposites, fire and ice, and that's exactly why the director took the risk. The decision shocked many. Two newcomers leading a massive fantasy drama? Impossible, critics murmured. But fate has a sense of humor. First days on set. Filming began in the heat of summer. The cast arrived in full costume, layers of embroidered robes, long wigs, swords strapped to their backs. The studio wasn't glamorous. Dust, humidity, and the faint hum of cicadas filled the air. Xiao Zhan would later recall, "Every time I put on Wei Wuxian's black robes, I felt like I was stepping into another life." The first scene they shot was simple, Wei Wuxian teasing Lan Wangji in the cloud recesses. But even then, something happened that no one expected. As the camera rolled, Xiao Zhan's eyes danced with mischief. Wang Yibo stood stoic, face expressionless, but when he looked back, there was a flicker of something, restraint, curiosity, maybe even warmth. The director didn't yell, "Cut." He just watched. The silence stretched, and suddenly the crew felt it too, that invisible pull between the two characters. When the scene ended, everyone exhaled. Someone whispered, "That wasn't acting." Between takes. Behind the scenes, their personalities clashed in the most entertaining ways. Xiao Zhan laughed easily, cracking jokes to lift everyone's mood. Wang Yibo, quiet and focused, would simply raise an eyebrow at his antics. During one break, Xiao Zhan playfully grabbed Yibo's sword prop and spun it around, before it almost hit a cameraman. The crew froze. Wang Yibo blinked once, then muttered, "You're hopeless," and they both burst out laughing. Those small, human moments built the foundation of their real-life bond. They didn't need to rehearse chemistry. It was growing naturally between long takes and late-night rehearsals under the studio lights. The struggle behind the magic. But the journey wasn't easy. Every day meant 14 hours of filming, bruised arms from sword choreography, and endless retakes under the heavy robes. The heat was suffocating. Once, in the middle of a fight scene, Xiao Zhan tripped on his robe and hit the ground hard. The director rushed in, but Xiao Zhan just grinned through the pain and said, "Wei Wuxian wouldn't stop for a little fall." Wang Yibo was no stranger to pain either. Known for his perfectionism, he insisted on performing most of his stunts. When the Guqin scenes required finger movements matching real music, he practiced for hours until his fingertips were raw. There were nights when the crew doubted if the show would even make it to air. But then, they'd watch a playback of a scene, Xiao Zhan laughing under the rain, Wang Yibo standing silently behind him, and they knew something extraordinary was happening. A moment that changed everything. One evening, they filmed a quiet scene under the peach blossoms, Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji walking side by side. The script only called for them to pass through, no dialogue. But Xiao Zhan, in character, suddenly stopped, looked up at the falling petals and smiled. Wang Yibo, instinctively, paused too. He looked at him, really looked, and the air shifted. The cameras kept rolling. That spontaneous moment became one of the most replayed visuals in the entire series. The director later confessed, "It wasn't written that way. They just understood." From that day, no one doubted their connection again. When the crew became believers. During night shoots, when the lights dimmed and the air turned cold, the crew gathered quietly behind the monitors. There was something magnetic about watching these two bring Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji to life. Even when the cameras weren't rolling, the aura lingered, a strange mix of stillness and electricity. Cinematographers started adjusting shots just to capture their smallest reactions, the corner of a smile, a glance, a breath. Every detail mattered. One lighting technician said later, it was like watching a painting move. From uncertainty to destiny. As filming continued, the cast began to sense they were part of something much larger than a fantasy show. They were building a world where morality, loyalty, and love intertwined, where two souls could connect in ways words couldn't express. And even before the world saw a single episode, those who worked on set already knew the Untamed would change them forever. When the final day of shooting arrived, there were tears, laughter, and silence. Xiao Zhan bowed to the crew, still dressed as Wei Wuxian. Wang Yibo stood beside him, a rare soft smile on his face. They didn't need to say goodbye. Their story was only beginning. Narrator's closing for your video outro. And that was how the Untamed began. Not with fame, not with fortune, but with faith. Two young actors, one daring director, and a dream too wild to be tamed. In the next part, we'll explore how these sparks turned into a worldwide phenomenon, the moments that made the world fall in love with Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji. If you're enjoying this journey into the Untamed world, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps this story alive, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.